Welcome to Outside Views. Today we continue our deep dive into what it would actually mean for the United Kingdom to apply for EU membership again. This is not a rejoin. There is no automatic way back. There's only the accession process. And as we have discussed before, this process is the same for every country that applies. And today we will examine one of the many chapters a candidate must align with before it can even be considered for accession. The chapter we are discussing today is enterprise and industrial policy, and this is a fundamental part of the EU's economic framework. It aims to promote competitiveness, support small and medium-sized enterprises, those famous SMEs, and create an environment that fosters business growth and investment. It also involves policies that facilitate structural change and modernization of industry. The UK, if it were to apply for membership, would have to align fully with this chapter, just like any other candidate. And as with all other chapters, this is not a negotiation, even if that's the name for it. It's a process of compliance. There are no opt-outs. There are no special arrangements. There's only the requirement to meet EU standards in full. The core of EU enterprise and industrial policy is to ensure that businesses operate in a competitive and fair environment. This is done through structural reforms, access to finance, and innovation policies. The EU has established various programs to support small and medium-sized enterprises or SMEs. The UK has historically had a strong SME sector. But post-Brexit, British businesses have faced new trade barriers, increased bureaucracy, and diminished access to European funding schemes. Joining the EU again would mean regaining access to EU business support programs. But it would also mean full compliance with EU enterprise laws and industrial strategies. One of the main objectives of this chapter is to encourage a business environment that is conducive to investment and growth. This is especially important for SMEs, which are often the backbone of national economies. The EU has common definitions and frameworks for SMEs. These frameworks dictate how businesses qualify for certain financial support mechanisms and regulatory exemptions. If the UK were to apply for membership, it would need to align its SME policies with those of the EU. This could mean reversing certain post-Brexit regulatory changes and ensuring that UK businesses are fully integrated into the EU's single market regulations. Another key area is industrial modernization. The EU promotes policies that support sustainable and digital transformation in industry. This means aligning with EU strategies on green energy, digitization, and automation. Since Brexit, the UK has diverged from some of these policies, prioritizing its own industrial strategies. But joining the EU again would mean adopting the EU's industrial policy framework in full. This includes commitments to reducing carbon emissions, increasing investment in digital infrastructure, and ensuring fair competition in industrial sectors. EU industrial policy also involves restructuring and privatization efforts. The EU encourages member states to maintain open markets and prevent monopolies. The UK would have to demonstrate that its industrial and competition policies align with EU principles. And this ties closely to Chapter 8 on competition policy. For instance, any government subsidies to businesses would need to comply with EU state aid rules. This is a major change from the UK's current post-Brexit approach, where the government has greater freedom to provide direct financial support to domestic industries. Another challenge would be administrative capacity. The EU requires an adequate administrative structure at the national, regional, and local levels to implement enterprise and industrial policies effectively. The UK would need to prove that it has the institutional capacity to manage and enforce these policies. And this means restructuring regulatory bodies to align with EU standards and ensuring effective coordination between government agencies and businesses. Enterprise and industrial policy is closely linked to research and innovation as well. The EU has extensive funding programs for technological advancements and for innovation-driven industries. Horizon Europe, for example, is one of the largest funding programs for research and development in the world. The UK lost full access to this program after Brexit. Joining the EU again would mean full participation, but also full compliance with EU rules on intellectual property, data sharing, and collaborative research initiatives. Another factor is foreign investment. The EU has strict regulations on how non-EU investments in strategic industries are handled. If the UK were to join again, it would have to comply with EU screening mechanisms on foreign direct investment. And this could affect trade agreements and bilateral investment treaties the UK has signed independently post-Brexit. Adjusting these agreements to align with EU rules would be another hurdle in the accession process. And digital transformation is another key aspect of EU industrial policy. The EU has set ambitious targets for digitization, cybersecurity, and AI-driven industries. Joining the EU again would mean the UK has to integrate its own digital policies with EU regulations. This includes rules on digital taxation, online consumer protections, and the handling of personal data under the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. Although the UK still follows GDPR principles, full compliance would need to be ensured within the EU framework. Like all chapters of the acquis, enterprise and industrial policy must be fully implemented before accession is granted. And compliance, of course, does not stop after accession. Once a country becomes a member, it must continuously align its policies with EU developments, but of course also has a say in the creation of them. And this means ongoing adjustments to regulations, continued participation in EU business initiatives, and maintaining an open and competitive business environment. And this brings us back to the broader picture of EU accession. Joining the EU again is not a simple return. It's an entirely new application process. And that process is governed by the Copenhagen criteria. The Copenhagen criteria set the fundamental requirements for any country seeking EU membership. A candidate country must demonstrate stable institutions guaranteeing democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and protections for minorities. It must have a functioning market economy capable of handling the competitive pressures of the EU. And it must show the ability to adopt and enforce the full body of EU law, including enterprise and industrial policies. Many people think of negotiations as two sides bargaining over terms. But EU accession negotiation is not that. It's a process of compliance. The EU does not lower its standards for new members. It is the applicant that must meet those standards. And the UK, if it were to apply, would not receive special treatment. It would go through the same 35-chapter process as any other applicant. Enterprise and industrial policy is just one of these chapters. Failure to comply means failure to progress in the accession process. And this is why the process is long and rigorous. And there are no shortcuts, only full compliance. Joining the EU again means fully adopting EU enterprise and industrial policies, restructuring regulatory frameworks, and committing to long-term alignment with EU objectives. There would be no opt-outs, no exceptions, only the process. So thank you for watching Outside Views, and if you found this analysis useful, don't forget to like and subscribe. And let me know in the comments what you think about this aspect of a potential UK application. See you in the next video, and the next one is right here in the end screen.